In this last RBM module, we will focus on the implementation phase. The three submodules are development and use of indicators, how to set up a results-based monitoring system, and finally some good advice when it comes to evaluating results. Even though evaluation can seem a bit far away when you start planning a project, it is our experience that reflecting upon how our development intervention is going to be evaluated can prove very useful, even in the planning phase. Monitoring and evaluation are often mentioned together, but they serve two different, though related, purposes. The purpose of monitoring is to provide the managers and other key stakeholders with information about progress and achievement of results during the implementation phase, in order to enable them to take adequate decisions and adjust the design of the development intervention while it is still ongoing. Evaluations are often done after a given intervention has ended and is concerned with questions such as relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, impact, and sustainability. But some development organizations also do ex-ante evaluations, where you evaluate the setup of a program even before it starts, and midterm evaluations are also rather common. On the next slide, you will find an overview of when monitoring and evaluation is often done throughout the program cycle. So, when do we plan and when do we do monitoring and evaluation? Well, we start out in the planning phase by reflecting about indicators, or success criteria we could call them, asking ourselves, how can we know and measure if our intervention has been a success? Setting up a results-based monitoring and evaluation system starts in the early project phases. The actual monitoring then takes place during the program implementation period and informs us about the progress of the program. It should also give us information as to whether we can expect outcomes to materialize and whether the theory of change still holds good. Remember that monitoring also includes monitoring of assumptions and risks. Finally, the evaluation normally takes place by the end of an intervention, or sometimes even some time after the development intervention has ended, as outcomes often first materialize after the finalization of the program. We will now introduce you to the concepts of indicators and means of verification, as these are central for both monitoring and evaluation. So, what is an indicator? Well, indicators are variables that can help us indicate change. If, for instance, we are to drive 90 kilometers to reach our destination, then the number of kilometers driven could be an indicator of how far we have come. But often, we need more than just one measure. If we are driving in the wrong direction, then the number of kilometers will not be of much use. Indicators can be both quantitative and qualitative. They shall give managers relevant data for taking adequate decisions. Generally, managers are not looking for scientifically reliable data, but for management information only. Indicators are related to the outputs, the outcomes, and impact that our development intervention is aiming at. Indicators help us specify the desired end situation. If an output is that drivers shall be trained, then the number of men and women trained could be a quantitative indicator. If we want to know if our goal of having fewer road accidents is achieved, or on its way to be achieved, then the monthly or annual number of road accidents would provide useful information. But we might also want to know about the nature of the accidents. Sometimes we use what we call indirect or proxy indicators. There can be several reasons to formulate proxy indicators. For instance, that the subject of interest cannot be measured directly. This could be the case for more qualitative subjects like behavioral change, living conditions, good governance, etc. It could also be that the subject of analysis can be measured directly, but it is too sensitive to do so. For example, level of income, or in the context of an HIV/AIDS intervention, measuring level of safe sex. Finally, the use of an indirect indicator can be more cost-effective than the use of a direct one. As stated on the previous slide, indicators are variables that can inform us about a given change. In order to be able to measure the change, we also need to know what the initial value is and what the expected end value would be. We call this the baseline and the target, respectively. A target is the value that an indicator is supposed to attain at a given point in time, that is the end value. As an example, if the indicator suggested is the number of classrooms built, then the target could be that 33 classrooms are built by the end of 2017. A baseline indicates the value that an indicator has before the start of a development intervention. For example, if the indicator is the annual number of traffic deaths, then the baseline might be 26 annual traffic deaths in 2016. In real life, targets and indicators are often combined. For instance, stating that the indicator or success criteria is that 33 classrooms are built by the end of 2017. But it forms part of setting up a monitoring system to decide on relevant indicators and targets, and also to collect baseline information. There are some general principles or guidelines when formulating indicators. The most commonly used abbreviation is that objectives, indicators, and targets altogether shall be SMART. SMART stands for specific, that the chosen indicator is specific to the output, the outcome, or the impact that we want to measure. Measurable refers to that you have to be able to measure an indicator in quantitative or qualitative terms. The measurement shall be clearly defined so that two people would measure it in the same way. A for achievable points to the fact that you should have realistic expectations to the desired change. Is it realistic to believe that a given change will occur given the amount of resources invested? R for relevant is about ensuring that the indicator captures the essence of the desired result, that it is relevant to the intended outputs and outcome, and that the indicator provides information which is relevant to the change process and its stakeholders. Finally, T for time bound. What is the foreseen time span within which the change shall happen? Targeting a decrease of 10% over a year is rather different than 10% over 10 years. There are many different versions of what the various letters stand for. Some also argue that indicators should not only be SMART but SMARTer, where you add E for evaluative and R for responsive to changes in the context of the development intervention. Yet others underline that indicators should be genderized, which means that indicators shall be able to tell the difference in participation and impact on men and women. Means of verification are the reports, the statistics, surveys, etc. that can inform us about the development of the indicators. When designing a monitoring system, it is important that there are means of verification and that they give us reliable data. The means of verification should be accessible at a reasonable cost. Sometimes you can only get precise data if you undertake expensive surveys. Therefore, when we identify relevant means of verification, we should aim at using existing data whenever possible. Finally, it is worth considering whether your project organization has the necessary human and financial resources to undertake the monitoring. Sometimes you will have to consider training and equipping the people responsible for M&E if you want an output suitable for making good management decisions. Once we have identified the relevant indicators and means of verification, we can now finalize the results framework. Remember that the results framework is a dynamic document that can and should change as we get wiser during project implementation. If we find out that the original intervention logic or pathway of change does no longer seem realistic, then we should think about alternative ways of achieving the results, or lower our level of ambition if this is not possible. As a program manager, you should always ask yourself, can we be sure to produce the expected outputs if we undertake the foreseen activities? And can we be sure to achieve the desired outcomes if we produce the expected outputs? And also, will the outcomes, if achieved, lead to or at least contribute to the overall impact that is the reason for financing the development intervention in the first place? Finally, we also have to assess whether our assumptions hold good and how our risks are developing. Now it is your turn to do an exercise on indicators and means of verification. Use the project or program that you used for the stakeholder analysis, the problem analysis, the theory of change, the assumptions, and the risks. Now, assess the indicators or suggest some indicators if they're not yet formulated, using the SMART criteria. Then, assess the means of verification, focusing on validity, accessibility, and costs. Finally, consider the adequacy between the monitoring setup and the human and financial resources allocated. Remember to pause the PowerPoint video while you are doing the exercise. Welcome back. As in the other modules, we want to draw your attention to a few key points about indicators and means of verification. First, things that are easily measurable tend to be measured. And what is being measured and reported on often gets most of the attention. Remember that when you formulate indicators. Keep it simple though. Rather one or two good indicators with reliable and accessible means of verification than 10 nice-to-have indicators that will cost you a fortune to measure and will not tell you much more. Finally, monitoring and evaluation is about learning and documentation. Try to formulate a few good indicators on each level, that means output level, outcome level, and impact level, that can help you learn, document, and act accordingly. In the next two submodules, we shall focus on setting up monitoring and evaluation systems on the basis of indicators and means of verification.